Welcome to a special episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. We are thrilled to be celebrating our 300th episode today, and we couldn't have done it without you, our listeners and supporters. Over the years, we've covered a wide range of personal finance topics tailored specifically to pharmacy professionals, from student loan repayment strategies and investment planning to wealth protection and entrepreneurship. We've strived to provide valuable insights and practical advice to help you achieve your financial goals. To mark this milestone, we have a special episode lined up for you today. Tim and I will be reflecting on some of our most memorable moments and guests from the past 299 episodes. So sit back, relax, and join us as we celebrate 300 episodes of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. Today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast is brought to you by the American Pharmacists Association. APHA has partnered with Your Financial Pharmacist to deliver personalized financial education benefits for APHA members. Throughout the year, APHA will be hosting a number of exclusive webinars covering topics like student loan debt payoff strategies, home buying, investing, insurance needs, and much more. Join APHA now to gain premier access to these educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Tim, episode number 300. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it, Tim. It's kind of surreal, to be honest. I thought when we started this thing way back in the day that this would be a great project to dedicate some time to kind of lend our voices to the topic. But fast forward to today and where the podcast has gone, and some of the things that we've covered and some of the guests we've had on. It's kind of crazy. What are your thoughts?
It's been an amazing journey. We'll talk about some of the backstory. We're going to feature some of our favorite moments from the show over the last 6.5 plus years of doing this, and excited to revisit some of those exciting moments and some of the themes of the show. I don't think you or I would have ever predicted where this would have gone. Over 1.5 million downloads of the show. But I think more than anything, that number, I think certainly is an achievement. But what gets you and I most excited is what we hear from individuals of the impact that the show is having. Hey, I listened to this episode and I took this action, or it ignited a conversation between my spouse and I, or connected me with another pharmacist, or got me thinking in a different way. And that's the piece that gets me, fired up. And I think the reason we started it in the first place, and the reason we're continuing to do it today.
Yeah. I mean, it is we've said this before, it's such a great medium to get out there and, kind of have listeners, see a certain side of you and, be able to educate, but also to share and be vulnerable. One of the surrealist things, and I don't do them anymore, Justin Woods does, our director of business development, but I used to get on, calls with prospective clients that were looking for help on their financial plan. And, they would say things like, "Hey, Tim, I feel like I know you because I've been listening to the podcast for the last 2 years or whatever." And it's like, after I, the red kind of drains out of my face, it is kind of quite flattering. And you kind of sit in front of this mic and this camera, and you don't really think that, when you hit record, that it really has an impact. But, I do think that what YFP has done, and I think the major tool in which it has done this is through the podcast, is really moving the needle for, financial education, financial literacy, hopefully wellness in the pharmacy profession. And I still think that we have a lot of work to do. And, I'd be interested, to ask you what you think is next, maybe at the end of the podcast, and, where we're taking this thing. But yeah, I'm just super excited. I'm super grateful. I think I'm kind of like, I guess I'm technically listed as the co-host, but I kind of just show up, Tim, to be honest. I do my research on what I need to do, but I know you and Caitlin and Rose, so I want to give them flowers, just do such a great job of prepping. And there's just so much work that goes into this that is kind of behind the scenes, and really without you guys, we're not at episode 300. And it, from my perspective, it seems seamless, although I know it is not. So I just want to make sure that I express my gratitude to you and Caitlin and Rose and over the years, because I think it's, it's been a team effort. And as a fan of the show, as a co-host of the show, so to speak. I don't take that lightly.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that here, Tim. I had wanted to say some thank yous at the end, but this is a great place to do it because we had, when we started the show, July 2017, we had talked about what would be the frequency, right? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be every other week? And we had several folks tell us like, man, don't do weekly. Like that is a huge commitment. And I think in the only style that Tim Baker does, it's like, hey, let's jump in the deep end and figure it out.
Yeah.
We were doing A to Z, right? Editing, content planning, topics, but that would not be possible. We would not have been able to sustain that rhythm of weekly episodes, here now at episode 300 without Caitlin's help, right? Without Rose's help, without the team's help, without your engagement, without, the guests that have come on the show, the people that continue to listen, the folks that ask questions. And so it really has been a community effort, and it's been an incredible honor to be able to sit in the seat. And one of my favorite parts of the show, we'll talk more about this throughout the episode, is I hadn't really thought about like, hey, 300 episodes means 300 conversations that we get to be a part of, right? Sometimes that's a sneak peek into a story, a journey, a financial win. Sometimes that's meeting another pharmacy entrepreneur or an investor or an expert on a topic. And, I get incredible benefit out of just sitting in the seat and learning from the guests that we bring onto the show each and every week. So I also want to give a shout out to the many, many guests that we've had on the show. And that's something that we're certainly looking to do in the future as well. Tim, I want to bring back a little bit of humor as we get started here, but I was going back through some email in prep for this episode and found a string of emails from you and I back and forth, fall of 2016. This would be before we officially partnered, on the business or even making the decision on the podcast. And we were talking about, what are some name ideas? What are some taglines? What are some topic lines or topic ideas as it relates to the show? And some of the ones we threw out there are Pills and Bills Radio with Tim and Tim, Scripting Financial Freedom, Tim and Tim and the Money, Your Financial Script. And then all of a sudden, I remember this vividly. I was on vacation with my family in Hilton Head, and you and I were talking on the phone, and you said, why don't we call it the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast? And as simple as it sounds, like that was a very pivotal moment in the journey.
I think, I don't know this for sure, but like we both kind of had two separate brands. We were doing a very similar types of things. Obviously, you with education and the blog, and me with kind of working more one-on-one with pharmacists on their financial plan. But I think a lot of the underlying beliefs and kind of vision and direction was there. And you've never said this, but maybe it was more obvious to you because like I think you had
it
more
wasn't.
of like an I don't know. And for me, like I love Script. I love Script Financial. That was the original name of my firm when I launched. And it's funny how much time you spend on kind of trivial things like logo and colors and things like that, which they're important, but you kind of overweight that. And it's kind of the same thing with him with this, when I'm like, Tim's done a really good job of like, developing a following in a very short time. And I don't think I have much of an ego. And I'm like, why don't we just use your banner and use kind of the goodwill that you've created? And I think you'll remember because you were at Hilton Head. And I think, I don't know, was it a phone call? Because I kind of remember you sitting on like a back step or a front step and us having this conversation.
Video, I was, yeah.
And it was like, and it was kind of like that aha of like, duh, like, why didn't we think of this, 40 emails ago? Yeah, it is kind of funny. And sometimes it's like Occam's razor, right? It's like the simplest, it's the simplest thing that's in front of your face. So yeah, but some of those names, I think we were kind of trying to trade a little bit on like the Mike and Mike, the ESPN tandem that obviously they're not together anymore. But I think using the YFP brand just made the most sense in every, facet of what we were trying to achieve.
So as we celebrate episode 300, as I mentioned, we're going to go back to some of the most memorable moments from the show and highlight the various themes that we've covered over the past 6+ years. And it all started with episode 1 back in July of 2017. Let's take a listen where we talk about the origins of the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. We are so excited to be here. It's been a long time in the making, and we can't wait to get started on this journey. In this very first episode, we're going to discuss the origins of this podcast coming to life, our individual journeys to the world of personal finance, why we care about this topic so much, and what we have coming up and planned for future episodes. So, to the Your Financial Pharmacist community, I know there's lots of you out there that have been following the blog over the past year or so. I am super excited to be bringing on Tim Baker to this journey. Tim is a certified financial planner. And he's doing this business of personal finance and advising the right way. He's a fee-only advisor, and he has a passion for working with pharmacists. And he's going to add tremendous value to this podcast and to the Your Financial Pharmacist community as a whole. So I can't wait for you to get to meet him and know more about him. So Tim, you remember that time we met at Bob Evans off of I-71 in Mansfield, Ohio? How random was that?
Yeah, it was great. It was a magical breakfast. I think we sat down and we back up a little bit. We met each other actually via Twitter, if that's a thing. And I think that we realized that we were doing a lot of the same things and we had a lot of the same passions. So yeah, that breakfast in at Bob Evans was great for me, and I think it kind of was the first step in this direction of kind of partnering up and really bringing great content under the Your Financial Pharmacist brand and really build out the community. So I am super excited, Tim. I'm really ready to kind of begin this journey with you and get this podcast off the ground.
Tim, I got to admit, that's a little bit uncomfortable to listen to. I can hear the nerves and excitement in our voices. And we had no idea where things were going to go at that point, as we've already mentioned, but we knew that the podcast was a good next step after we had that first meeting. We had this shared passion of personal finance and pharmacy, but that takes you back, right? Hearing that?
It does. And what's left out of that, I actually turned on the first episode and you hear like the intro, and it's so different now. It's a lot better now, but like, yeah, I definitely do not go back and listen to those. But at the time, I'm like, hey, this is pretty good. And I'm sure, like, in given everything, like, it's not bad. It's just, but it goes back to that point of, you've been posting this lately on LinkedIn. You just got to start.
Yeah.
And the more that you get paralyzed in your brain, the less you're going to learn. And obviously, 300 episodes in, I don't know if I'm any more articulate or stutter any differently than I did then. But it was just so unknown. And I think 300. repetitions later, I wouldn't say it's polished because, and I will admit this, I edited, I think, the first 50 episodes of the podcast, and I would take way too much time, Tim, to kind of take out like my ums and some of the imperfections. And if you go through, like, you'll hear that probably episodes like 10 through 40 or something like that. But it's just not genuine. It wasn't really genuine. Like, this is how I talk. I say lots of ums. I don't say my G's. So I think that it was kind of a lesson for me. It's like, don't try to be something that you're not. And, in a world where I think everybody can kind of give you praise or give you like criticism, you kind of have to like filter that out, and I think sometimes like we'll hear something of like, hey, you suck, and that like sits well like more with you than like some of the other things that we hear that are positive. And that's kind of been part of the journey too. It's just being authentic, but it's just kind of crazy to hear that, which I don't know if I've ever listened to that since that episode, outside of doing the edit in. And I don't know, I feel like we've come a long way.
Tim, one of the things we focused on very early on in the show, and we've continued, is sharing pharmacist stories. And we really wanted to do this for a couple reasons. One, the topic of personal finance can be pretty dry. And two, we really wanted to foster and create a community where pharmacists were empowering and motivating one another. And, it's one thing for us to teach and preach, and we certainly do that sometimes. It's another thing to teach concepts and principles through stories. And I think it really helps foster that sense of, this isn't just you or I delivering material. This is us as a collective community of pharmacy professionals coming together to help empower one another on the path towards achieving financial freedom. And that was a really intentional decision. And I think we have seen the fruit of that throughout. And let's listen into one of the many debt-free stories that we have featured. And this is episode 31 with Adam and Brittany Patterson, starting with Adam talking about making the mental transition from student to new practitioner?
I would say throughout pharmacy school, I tried to mentally prepare myself, going towards graduation, listen to everybody tell me, hey, you'll be making six figures. Don't worry about it. What a lot of people don't consider at the time is that we actually don't bring home six figures at the end of the day. They don't factor in all the taxes and everything that cuts out of your paycheck. I didn't really have a plan at how I was going to tackle the debt, but knew that I had a grace period, 6 months to figure it out before I started making payments. My wife and I always joked about how much it would take us or how long it would take us to pay off our loans, but it wasn't until close to the end of the grace period that it all started to settle in. I think once we actually sat down and started to think about how much money we would owe in the long run, looking at the debt, looking at how much interest would build up, that we really started to focus on, attacking the debt. So at first, I would say at graduation, it really doesn't set in until that first payment is due.
Tim, you know the Pattersons well, and this journey that was featured on episode 31 was when Adam and Brittany had paid off $211,000 of debt in 26 months. And this really was a catalyst for their family and for their financial plan, right?
Yeah, and shout out to Adam and Brittany. I hear Adam's voice and I'm like, man, I like that guy, and I haven't talked to him in a while, and I need to reach out and see how they're doing. And they're the face of our website.
Mm-hmm.
So you see their face when you go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Yeah, I mean they were really at this jumping off point in terms of like, hey, what's next? And how do we transition? And they're just a great example of some of the behavioral finance that we'll talk about some more in this episode, but just great people. I was more thinking of it of like, as I'm listening to Adam, just some of the great people that I've got to work with, got to converse with, got to break bread with. They visited me and my daughter when they came through Baltimore. So just great people. But yeah, they're just another great example of, I think how they've approached, again, this mountain of debt, and then how they've, I think, done a great job of transitioning from that. And, the big thing, from them, I think when they started working with me, they were renting a house, and then they bought a beautiful home in, outside of Atlanta and Georgia. And it's just kind of awesome to see, to be honest, like the progress. And I'm kind of more stuck, not necessarily on the numbers, but on like the people, and the relationships that you develop. So yeah, definitely jotted down a note that I got to reach out to Adam and Brittany and see how they're doing. And hopefully we can meet up with them soon. But just another great conversation and another great example of just being intentional with your financial plan, which I know is a common theme that we try to hit on.
Yeah, that's what I really remember from their journey. And I'm so glad you mentioned the personal relationship side of it, right? Because I mean, the numbers on the debt repayment or the savings and investing, we love seeing that progress, but it's about what does that mean for them and their family and living a rich life. And, that's been fun to watch with the Pattersons. We're going to come back and talk about that through the episode. And Tim, one thing Adam said that really hit me was when he said, I didn't really have a plan for how to tackle the debt. And this is something that we hear on the regular, but it does feel, and maybe this is a little bit of a pat on our own back, but it feels like the conversation in pharmacy around student loans has become more nuanced in a good way, right? Pharmacists today in 2023 are asking us questions about student loans that demonstrates a level of baseline knowledge that we weren't hearing back in 2017.
There's a couple of shifts that are going on there. Like one, back in the day in 2017, 2018, 2019, there was a lot of pain around student loans, and a lot of pain coupled with where the heck do I even start? Like, how do I even take a proper inventory? And then I think as the years went on, it was pain, but I have a good baseline knowledge of what I have and what I need to pay back. But like, what are the X's and O's to do that?
Yeah.
Now, since the pandemic, obviously one of the things that's happened since we launched the podcast, among other changes that have happened, the long pause that we've had, I think has shifted. We don't hear a lot of pain around student loans because they've kind of been out of sight, out of mind. And I think that'll shift back when the loans come back online and people are paying. But it's kind of just been like this hibernate and bear. But I would agree with you, Tim. I think I'd like to hopefully take some credit of why that shifted a little bit in terms of definitely a more nuanced, a more thoughtful approach to inventory or even like talking about different repayment plans, which were just non-existent before. And be honest, non-existent even in the financial planning world, because a lot of this was just so new. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is obviously X's and O's, but I think when it comes down to what we're trying to do is soothe a pain that a lot of our listeners had at the time, and I still think we'll have, once the pause basically, is over. But yeah, it's kind of been interesting to see that transition over time to where we're at today, and then again in a couple months, what that will look like when the payments start coming back on.
And again, shout out to the Pattersons. Grateful for their contribution, sharing that story. And that is one of many debt-free stories that we've shared on the podcast. And we've covered student loans A to Z. So if anyone's looking for either content, knowledge around student loans or debt-free stories and journeys, go to some of the throwback episodes that we've had throughout the show. So student loans, we've covered in detail on the show, a big part of the early days of YFP, but we've also focused heavily on stories of pharmacists that are working towards financial independence and living a rich life today while taking care of their future selves. Let's take a listen to one financial independence journey, that of Corey and Cassie Jenks, that we featured on episode 134.
Yeah, so you've had a couple great guests talk about their FIRE journey, but it's essentially financially independent, retire early. So you save enough, and the number that is commonly used is you save enough to you have 25 times your annual expenses, and then theoretically you can withdraw that indefinitely at a 4% rate. And to get there, you're going to have to really bust it for 10 to 20 years, depending on what your savings rate is, depending on what your own spending rate is. And as Mr. Money Mustache and hundreds of other bloggers and people have shown, it's a very viable path. And I think that if we had found that in our mid-20s before kids, okay, we could have sucked it up and both worked full-time hardcore to get there. But then we had a kid and realized we want to have time with them as much as he can be a little pain. And so I came across this idea of post-FI. And so the FI being financially independent. And this says that if you save enough at a high rate for a short period of time early on in your life and career, you're going to have the time and compound interest to have it grow to what you need it to be by the time you retire. So that if you hit this post-FI number, you can scale back the work you're doing. You can take a job that has a little bit more risk, knowing that you don't need to continue to contribute to your retirement in order to hit that number. Now, and I love how you like to personalize this idea of personal finance, because traditional FIRE people would get angry at you for not just going all the way through. And maybe post-FI people would get angry at us because our version of it is to try to get to a number, but then still work some in order to save some. I don't think we want to hit a number and then stop. So our version is to get to the number we want and then have the freedom to contribute a little bit less as our lifestyle changes with our family.
Tim, one of the reasons I want to bring back this story is I've stayed in touch with Corey and Cassie, great people, shout out to them. And this was really a key pivotal moment for them and their family, this journey that they were on towards financial independence and being intentional with the financial plan, just like we talked about with the Pattersons. And since that point, because of the groundwork they had laid, Corey's been able to pursue his entrepreneurial efforts as an author, comedian, speaker. Cassie's been able to shift jobs to be more in alignment with what she was looking to do, which has really given them a lot of the flexibility that they were looking for with a young family, to be able to have that time together, but also to be pursuing the things that they wanted to be doing professionally. And so, I think that is such a great example of the combination of the financial plan and what we're ultimately trying to achieve. And so, what one example of many, Tim, of something you often say, which is, hey, we've got to find this balance between living a rich life today and taking care of our future selves. Why is this such a central theme for you personally, as well as for our planning team that works with our pharmacist households all across the country?
That's a great question, Tim. So why is that important? So I think before I answer that question, I was when I was listening to Corey, I was just thinking and it was kind of the same a little bit of the same conversation we had when we were on a recent road trip, because you kind of had mentioned, planning for your boys' college and kind of going all the way to one end of like, hey, I had this experience of having a lot of debt, so I want them to experience that. And for me, the thing that was screaming as I was listening to Corey speak and then kind of relating that to our conversation in the car was, it's planning is greater than the plan. And what I mean by that is like, it's kind of the Mike Tyson quote. It's like, you have a plan until, someone punches you in the face or life happens or you have a kid, which those are things, having a kid, those are things that have happened since like we started the podcast, for me at least. And I know you've added a couple to your crew. So it's more about planning and less about the plan, because the plan is going to change, because change is an inevitable part of our life. And I think the better that we can cope with change and plan around that, the better we will be. But the answer to your question about, live a rich life today, live a rich life tomorrow, I think that a lot of and you're starting to see it swing, back the other way. A lot of the mantras like save, 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 have enough for retirement, and, make sure you're doing all these things for like the 30-year older version of yourself. But then, there's a lot more content and stuff out there. What was the book that you recently read? Die with Zero or whatever. That's kind of shifting that back. And I think like the dangerous thing is that if you follow those kind of rules of thumb, you get to the end of the rainbow and you retire, and say you retire with 5 million. But if you would have taken that trip or those trips throughout the course of the year, or if you would have taken, that one day a week to kind of work on a side hustle or spend time with your family, maybe you retire with 2 or 3. And to me, like the question I would ask the client would be like, well, what's the point? Like, what are we really trying to achieve? Is it to amass a bunch of ones and zeros in a bank account, or is it to really live a rich life as you age through your 20s, 30s, 40s, hopefully to your 100s? And I think that because we get so busy and we're on to the next thing, pharmacists are very type A. It's okay, I've done this, what's next? Okay, I've done this, what's next? But I think what planning really does, or I think if it's done well, it really allows space for a conversation of, is this what we really want? Is this a wealthy life? And I think we get up, and this was me completely. Like I was raised, and I love my parents, but I was raised that the key to success or happiness, if you want to, intertwine those two, is, Tim, you have to get the best grades that you can get to get into the best college that you can get into, to then, graduate with the highest GPA, to get the best job, to make the most money. And I realized, in my first probably 30 years of life that like that didn't necessarily add up to me, that I was often happiest when things were simpler, when I wasn't making a lot of money, and I had a lot more control of my time. And, I think it really forced me to kind of question and to evaluate what were the important things in my life. And unfortunately, especially if you kind of get into that trap of, man, I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours, there's no capacity to really question, am I on the right track or not? Sometimes like it takes you to do that. Sometimes it's you and a partner. Sometimes it's a third party, an objective person like a therapist, like a financial planner, maybe a priest or a minister or whatever, to kind of ask those pointed questions and to challenge the paradigm in which you are in. And I'm happy to see that a lot more of the content or some of the discussion around this is not to, again, I kind of think about corporate America, right or wrong, but corporate America is running a marathon at a sprinter's pace, and it's really not a sustainable thing. So, whether that's your profession, whether that's, the way that you're spending money, the way that you're spending your time, I really think that question of, are we living a wealthy life today, or are we living a wealthy life tomorrow? And I think having balance between those is such an important question to ask yourself as you are kind of proceeding through life. And because I know for me, like there's been parts of my life where I'm like, it's kind of like, all right, when you're little, you kick your soccer ball into the sticker bushes, and you just stick your head down, you run in and you get out as quickly as you can. And then you take some, lumps, but sometimes we just get stuck in those thorny bushes, and you wake up and you're 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, and you're like, what the heck am I doing? So I think being self-reflective, it's really about that more than anything.
Yeah, and Tim, you've role modeled this firsthand, and let's take a listen back to episode 227 where we discussed this further, right? How much is enough? The importance of balancing experiences today with the future, and this included your decision to buy your motorhome. Let's take a listen.
One of the things I say to prospective clients, we might go through the wealth building stage of the financial plan, and we'll do a nest egg calculation that says, hey, Tim, you need $5 million to retire. And that's typically where they look at us like we have 5 million heads, right? Because it's a big number that's in the future that doesn't really mean anything to me. So, we go through the process of kind of discounting that back to a number that says, okay, if you're putting this into your TSP or this into your IRA or this into your 401k a month, you're on track or you're off track, right? So we can kind of break that down into more of a digestible number to see if we're trending to that goal, given, a handful of assumptions. But the point of this story is, if we do work together for the next 30 years and you don't have 5 million, you have 7 million, 8 million, 10 million, whatever that is, that's great. Like that, those numbers are bigger than 5 million. But if you're miserable because you look back at that list of all the things that you want to do over 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, whatever that is, and you haven't done anything and you're miserable because of it, or you're disappointed, the question I would ask you is, what's the freaking point?
That's right.
Like why get this education? Why earn this money? Why pay down this debt? Why invest or whatever, if we're not going to intentionally direct it to the things that matter to you most? And I don't think that I'm going to be on my deathbed and I'm going to say, I wish I would not have bought that RV. I just don't think that in my heart of hearts, because of I just think about the reaction that my daughter and my niece has had just when we pulled that up. And even the 2 camping trips that I had, I think I snapped a few pictures and texted them to you, Tim, even in our first camping trips. It's going to be an adventure. And to extrapolate that out, like that's our lives. Our lives are adventures, but we have to be willing to take it, and seize it. And I think that's what Life Planner really tries to get to the surface, is what is that adventure, and taking that road and not necessarily adapt to a paradigm that's not yours.
Tim, that was great stuff. And it has been a memory maker for your family.
Yeah. I was getting a little teary-eyed listening to that, because it's also like a good reminder for me, to be completely honest. Sometimes Shay and I will look at it and like, man, is this worth it? Because it is just a money suck. But then when you look at it in totality, like just the things that, in the short time that we've had it, it's been a game changer. And I don't know, listen to that. The 2 things that, were kind of evident to me is, one, I repeat myself a lot. So I say a lot of the same things over and over again, which I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. It's just kind of like part of my messaging, but also like it's a reminder, because sometimes like, and again, like we've asked the question, even since we got it, man, is this worth it? It's a lot of money. Gas prices have gone up and all that kind of stuff, but it is. I mean, we recently, changed where we store it, and I'm driving it from one to the other, and I'm just getting so jacked up. And, my son will see it parked out front. He's like, oh, we going camping. He just lights up. He's like, I want to go camping. And I'm like, no, buddy, we're not going to go camping until it's a little bit warmer. And he's like genuinely upset. So yeah, we have a lot of plans for it. Obviously, we have to make sure that, we budget and we have our plan built around it. But I would reiterate the same thing, that I had said, is like, I don't think that I'm going to be on my deathbed saying like, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I think it'll be the opposite. I wish I would have done it sooner. I wish I would have done it longer, or did more trips. So yeah, I think it's just so important to, and that's the thing that I really enjoy about the work that we do. After the podcast turns off and people say, hey, like I want to work with you guys. I think our planners do a really good job of like bringing forward. Yeah, we got to do the X's and O's and the technical stuff, but bringing forward like that trip that you want to take, or this goal that is not necessarily, it's money adjacent, right? Because a lot of the things we have to like plan the dollars for, but it's not necessarily like traditional investing or an insurance policy.
Yes.
I think those things are just as important, and And I don't know if a lot of planners feel that way, but to me, if you have that trip to Paris or the Pacific Northwest out there, I'm like, where's the money for that? Like, let's get this going. Let's do this. And let's cross it off the list and then move on to the next one.
Great stuff. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, Tim, is the joy that it's been to get to know some of the guests that we've had on the show, many of which have led to some awesome friendships and collaborations, and just a ton of fruit that has come from that. Most of our guests have been pharmacists, but we've had the opportunity to interview several New York Times bestselling authors, gurus in personal finance. And this has been an honor. I mean, it's been a ton of fun just to learn from these folks. I've been amazed at how gracious people can be with their time. Let's take a listen back to my interview, one of these with Rachel Cruz, episode 215, where she discusses the emotional and behavioral side of the financial plan, including how we can write our own financial story.
I mean, there's so much hope. And I think even in the money piece of my message that I, communicate with people is like, no matter what mistakes you've made, yeah, maybe you do have a ton of debt. So on a more logistical side, yeah, maybe you have a deeper hole to dig out of than the person next to you. But no matter what, you get to make decisions to say, no, I actually want to change, how I view something or the habits around money. And the same is true with your classroom. A lot of people, I would say, grew up in a hard environment when it came to money with their parents. But yeah, that you don't have to just mirror that story, right? You can take charge of your life to say, you know what? I'm not going to sit here and bash my parents, but I'm also not going to defend them. I'm going to just tell the truth of what happened. And here's the truth. Okay, there's some good stuff and there's some bad stuff. And the bad stuff I can forgive. And I'm going to move forward, though, to choose something different for my life and my family. And I think it's powerful. And I think we have to do that in all of parenting. I'm not a parenting expert by any means, but I'm like, my husband and I have said, okay, this is our family. What are we going to choose to do in this? And so the money piece is part of that.
Tim, I felt like this episode was oozing with wisdom, and I loved her authenticity. But one of the things she really hit on, we spent most of the conversation talking about, was really the behavioral side of the financial plan, the emotional side of the financial plan. And she was alluding there to the money classroom that we grow up in, the money scripts that we hear growing up, and how much of an influence, whether we realize it or not, that has on how we approach our finances today. So, Tim, from your perspective, either individually or also what you see with clients, like how important is that money classroom, is that money script, and understanding what perspective you're bringing into the financial plan to ultimately achieve the goals that you want to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, we all have these money scripts. It could be, money is the root of all evil, or money solves all your problems, or, there's, don't trust people with money. There could be a lot of different things that, based on your parents, their upbringing, and how they imprint that on you, it's a big factor. I always kind of point to the Advisors Alpha Vanguard study, and that highlights, if you work with a financial advisor, they're supposedly returning 3% per year on your assets, and half of that is really attributed to not technical or any type of special analysis. It's really like the behavioral coaching. And that's significant, and I think that, whether we want to believe it or not, like we all have these scripts, this baggage, and it could be a positive thing. It could also be something that's a limiting factor for us to really kind of achieve the goals that we have. I think that I'm dabbling more into, and I don't think I've even told you this, Tim, but I'm dabbling more into like Stoicism. So reading some books on Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius. And, one of the big things that I'm pulling out of that is like, you can really only control what you can control.
Yeah.
And a lot of our thoughts and a lot of the things that preoccupy us are things that are completely out of our control.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what she was saying. And, you can think about your upbringing and how, you were taught, and you can hold on to that and not let that go, but probably to your detriment. It's really about what are you doing today? What are the intentional actions that you're doing today to better yourselves? And that could be financially related. It could be something completely, outside of that, just general wellness. So, I think that part of, again, working with a therapist, an advisor, whoever that is to kind of pull back some of that facade, ask good questions, ask pointed questions, challenge you to say, again, are we really where we want to be? Or when you said this, let's dissect that. Where is that coming from? What is this? How is this serving you or not serving you? What are the limiting factors? And we see this, I think, more often with, people that are waded into spaces that they're completely unfamiliar. So I'm thinking about like a business, and we hear things like imposter syndrome, but it is true for that individual that is working a shift at a hospital, like a farm, like all of that is there. So to me, again, it's about reflecting on these behaviors and then questioning, does this serve me today? And if it doesn't, let it go and then move on. And I think building that as part of the plan is important. I was talking with one of our lead planners who's doing a certification on, financial, like kind of psychology counseling.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is to kind of, again, uncover some of the things that she sees in clients to be able to better serve them or challenge them when they, utter X or Y in terms of how they approach, their finances. So it's really, really important, the behavioral aspect of it. And I think having the pulse on your own, which is very hard, is, I think, part of the building blocks of creating a plan that serves you and not others. So great episode.
Tim, as we've evolved in our own journey as entrepreneurs and have had the opportunity to connect with various pharmacists that are following a similar pathway, we quickly came to the realization that, finance is a thread across so many, not only individual stories, but so many business stories. And, whether it's people that are dreaming about their idea, those that are in the thick of launching something, or those that are looking to scale, it's really hard to separate out our personal financial plan and goals from the business. And that's in part why we started featuring more and more of the show, I would say over the last 100 episodes or so, on pharmacy entrepreneurs, knowing that personal finance is a common thread to pharmacy entrepreneurship, to that community. But also, given our personal passion for entrepreneurship, we wanted to give some examples and on some level inspire others with the many different ways that a pharmacist degree and license can be valuable. Let's take a listen back to one of these pharmacy entrepreneurs interviews that we featured in 2022. That was Kun Yang, the co-founder and CEO of Prickly Cactus Water, and he was featured along with his co-founder on Shark Tank.
I think there were a lot of moments when I look back. It wasn't like, I think, one specific, I mean, I do have a specific moment that I'll share, but I think there were a lot of feelings that I think that felt familiar to me, even in that moment, that I can kind of trace back and say, okay, this kind of makes a lot of sense. And so the moment really was walking into, I had just finished our fellowship and program and had started a new company. It was a spinoff of our existing fellowship business, and kind of just walked in and had really, really fallen in, deep appreciation for the opportunity and the people that I was working with. But I think one of the days I kind of walked in and I looked around, and this was still pretty early on in our journey, but something hit me that I had always thought that through all the different, career changes and exploration of getting to that point, that going this quote unquote non-traditional path would have led me to move away from this feeling of quote unquote imposter syndrome, or feeling like, everything that I was doing was actually getting more and more specific. And it was because it was leading me to a point of clarity, right? And really over time, I realized that imposter syndrome and point of clarity had a lot to do with an understanding of who I wasn't, as opposed to understanding of who I was. And I think that's something that probably a lot of us can relate to, is growing up in your 20s and even maybe sometimes your early 30s. You have a lot of ideas of maybe what you don't like to do, right? Or what are some of the things that don't excite you, and what are some of the general things that do excite you, but you may not really understand specifically why or what you're really good at to allow you to succeed in those roles. So again, all those feelings led to that one moment I walked in and looked around in this open office setting, and I was kind of like, man, there's a lot of incredibly talented and smart individuals around me. And if I work really, really hard here for another 15, 20 years, I could really be like one of them, and these were at the time, again, all my heroes that I looked up to that kind of forged the pathway for us before. And I guess it hit me in that moment that there wasn't a specific role that I could look at and say, like, that is exactly in specific what I wanted to do. And I think that was my, I call it a quarter life crisis moment of really all that imposter syndrome bubbling and kind of blowing up all at once, realizing that, wait a second, how could I have done all this and pursued all this specificity only to feel this still in this moment? There's not much more specificity I could pursue. And that was when it really kind of became an introspective question of, like, is there something outside of pharmacy that I could apply my skills to, still within the health and wellness space that we were really passionate about, that I could find, truth and clarity in.
Tim, that was one of my favorite episodes of 2022 and just the opportunity to cross paths with Kuhn. We would later find out we've worked at the fellowship program. Shout out to the MCPHS fellowship program, Amy Mystery, who's been our collaborator now 5+ years, and some really incredible graduates that have come out of that program, one of which is being Kuhn. But just to hear his reflection on that episode of his quarter life crisis, of coming to this moment of, hey, my pharmacy degree and the experiences I've had are valuable, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to be identified by that or be identified by a traditional career path. And I suspect maybe that connects a little bit with you as well in your own journey.
Yeah, and I think going back to Corey, like I think early on, Corey Jenks, like we definitely, wanted to give a voice of more of a non-traditional path. I mean, you yourself, Tim, are since we started the podcast, again, what's changed? You're no longer full-time in academia, you're full-time with YFP, so more of a non-traditional. So I'll preface this by saying, like, being an entrepreneur is not for everyone. And, I think that that's important to say out loud because, there's a lot that goes into that, and it's not necessarily for every personality type. But I do think that for me personally, being an entrepreneur, I get a lot of juice and a lot of just energy listening to other entrepreneurs kind of share their story. And, this one in particular, I just, I obviously we had him on the podcast. I watched their Shark Tank episode. It's very inspiring. Mm-hmm. And I do think that one of the common things that comes out with a lot of these sources is the financial piece. Like that is a financial thread, whether, it's before, during, or even after, the whole journey of being an entrepreneur. So I think selfishly, we highlight some of these stories because, like, it's part of the things that you and I are both interested in. And I can hear my own story when I listen to Kuhn in this episode. And I'm sure a lot of other pharmacists that are going down this path. But, I think that it's another thing that, for us to kind of give voices or to highlight, you don't have to necessarily color within these lines. Like there's a life outside of this. And, for some people that clicks and for some it doesn't. And these particular types of episodes, for me personally, being a fan of the show, are just super inspiring. And again, I can hear my own story in a lot of them. So.
Yeah, Tim, one of the things that comes to mind here is when we started doing more of these interviews, I've often shared with folks, I grew up in small business. We've had a family business. My dad's been in business, advised businesses. And I think that probably has stayed with me over time. But I just can't get enough of talking with other entrepreneurs. What are you building? Why are you building it? What's working? What's not working? What are you learning about yourself in the journey? And it's just, it's incredible to have those conversations. And one of my goals with these conversations was, hey, I'm not necessarily expecting that any listener is going to listen to, Kuhn's story, or I think about Allison Brennan, the founder of Imogene & Co., or, Corrine Wong, who founded My Guiltless Treats we had on the show, Victoria Reinhardt's with Mobile Health Consultants, and the many stories we featured, Kelly Karlstrom and the awesome work that she's doing. Not that a listener is going to say, I'm going to go do exactly what Kelly's doing, but rather it's going to give them a different way of thinking, perhaps a source of inspiration and motivation of, like, I had no idea, like, a pharmacist went the same traditional path that I went at one point, or I am currently in, if students are listening, and they went and did, something that was non-traditional. They colored outside of the lines. And again, we're not suggesting that path is for everyone, but we want to give a voice to that. And I think we're in a really exciting / disruptive time in our profession. And depending on how you look at disruption, it can be scary. That's fair, but it also can be exciting. It means there's opportunity for new ideas, new innovations, to come to fruit. And we're seeing that out in the pharmacy entrepreneurship community. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the writing's on the wall, and I would love to have maybe, when I ask you the question of, like, what's next, Tim, I'd like to actually have more long form discussions about this, like the profession of pharmacy. And I know there's some other podcasts that obviously, are strictly focused on that. But yeah, I mean, I think the writing's on the wall for, a lot of the things that we've been talking about with, AI and Amazon and, different legislative things that are out there, that I think it is ripe for disruption. And you can be on, hey, you embrace that, or you could be on the, I'm going to dig my heels in. And yeah, I think that when I look back at my journey, before even meeting you, it was a podcast that I listened to over and over again. And it was about financial planners that had a very similar story to me, that were kind of leaving the traditional big siloed firm and doing it themselves. And I'm like, I remember having that like aha moment of, I'm a pretty smart guy. Like, I feel like I could figure this out. Like and I just took that leap. And for me, and you see this in a lot of entrepreneurs, because unlike you, I didn't grow up in that environment. I grew up in the environment of like, kind of what I was saying, like get the best job, i.e. the safest job. Like, like why would you ever like leave a steady paycheck to go start from zero? And like, that's a completely foreign concept in my family. And I think for me is like, once I made that switch, I kind of want to say like the chemistry in my brain changed, because again, like I always talk, I said this on a recent post that you had, I was definitely that, and a lot of pharmacists can relate to this. Every decision that I made, it was, I'm going to dot all the I's, I'm going to cross all the T's, I'm going to analyze every angle of this decision. And, time will go by and I'll be paralyzed by what should I do? And now, since becoming an entrepreneur, it's really like, I'm going to cannonball in and figure it out. And, I might swallow some water, but then I'm going to iterate, right? So I'm going to figure out what works or what doesn't work. And I'm going to save a lot of time doing that. Now I'm just going to do a general analysis. But I think that mindset for me, I almost kind of equated to like the chemistry in my brain had changed, because, and again, I think, you talk about, and entrepreneurship comes in a lot of forms, but, it could be a side hustle, but it could be where you're leaving your job in academia and you're doing this full time. Like, you're uncapping your income potential. There's just a lot of things that are attractive about it to me. And again, as a fan of the show and highlighting these stories, one, part of me is like, I'm interested to see like, what are people doing with their PharmD that's related or even unrelated to the profession of pharmacy? What are some creative things that people are doing, and how is the profession going to pivot?
Yeah.
Because I think, to your point, it is ripe for disruption. So yeah, just super grateful to have, like I said, the individuals that you mentioned come on and share their story. And I'm hoping to do much more of these in the future, because they're inspiring in the least. So
yeah, it's so fun to give a voice to the stories, hear the passion that comes through. And one of the things I think I've shared with you, Tim, before, when I think about the traditional pie chart of the profession of pharmacy, right? You've got half or so that are in community practice.
Yeah.
Maybe 20% or so that are in hospital practice. A smaller segment that's in industry, smaller segment that's in academia and research, and then that final 5% or so is very splintered between all these different opportunities. And I think, if I had to put a crystal ball in the future of the profession, we're going to see that splintered part of the pie chart become bigger and bigger, with pharmacists pursuing more and more non-traditional options, which is exciting. The role of the pharmacist is an important one in our healthcare system. And I think we've got some really cool ideas and of things that people are doing. And I have a feeling we're going to reflect upon this period as one that was really disruptive in a good way for the profession.
Absolutely.
So the last clip I want to share centers around the giving part of the financial plan. Let's hear from pharmacist, educator, and Rising Suns pharmacy founder, Sarah Atkins, who came on episode 276 to talk about her why for giving, including the journey of starting a nonprofit pharmacy in Southeastern Ohio. Let's hear from Sarah Atkins.
I was raised in the church, and I think regardless of the spiritual realm in which you're raised, a lot of my upbringing was about giving and making sure that those who were not as fortunate, that I gave to those people who were not as fortunate. I was taught that since a young age. And I think that for me, that is, I don't have a lot of money, right? I never have needed that or wanted that, but I have time. Do I have time? That's the question.
That is the question.
I think I don't have time, but I definitely give wholeheartedly of my time is what I give. So I have given, it makes me feel good, truly. And when I'm at the free pharmacy, it is a lot like community pharmacy, right? It's a lot. You're on your feet, you're taking phone calls, you're answering questions, you're trying to figure out cost of medications, spending a lot of time on the phone asking patients about their insurance coverage, or, why are you not eligible and how much is your copay for this? I have a couple people because it's come to my head. I have a woman who has an $8,000 deductible on her plan. $8,000.
Mm-hmm.
That always comes to my head about people with their deductibles. So why giving? Because I can.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can. I'm bright. I have a good job. I have a lot of support from my family and my community. I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm able. So why not? And it makes me feel good. I feel like I've done something to make myself proud and to make my community proud and my family proud.
Because I can. All the feels there from Sarah, someone I have a
good stuff.
Great amount of admiration and respect for. And, Tim, her passion and mindset around giving of time and money is contagious. And I know one of the things you and I are both excited about is, as we work with thousands of pharmacists across the country and have the impact I think that we hope to have on improving the financial wellness, pharmacists working through paying off their own debt, getting a solid financial foundation in place. I think that naturally the next question for many pharmacists is, how can I help? How can I help in whatever capacity means most to me? And that might be, something that's more traditional in giving, nonprofits, churches, organizations. It might be family members, friends that are in need, other types of areas. But, we really see this when we talk about the evolution, of YFP and kind of the next phase of the podcast and other things we're doing. I think the giving part of the financial plan is going to be a really important one.
I think sometimes there's a little bit of guilt around this, especially kind of going back to the money scripts. And I think this is a good money script to have is to give back. But, it's sometimes you got to put your own, oxygen mask on before, you can do that. So yeah, I think that this is one that I think naturally as people, again, kind of continue on their journey, they're going to be looking for ways that they can kind of give back because a lot of people have been helped along the way as well. And it's something that you and I, again, have talked about, in terms of like, where does YFP fit in this whole realm of giving? And, I think there's going to be some things that we're going to announce here in the future around that, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, it is one of those things that I'm hoping that we can shine more of a light on, of stories like Sarah's, and because I think it is so important, and it goes back to like, what's the point, right? And I think if you can, she mentioned it, how it makes her feel, and I think if you can incorporate that into your own, financial plan or kind of the vision of, what you're trying to achieve, I think it just, all boats rise. So love these stories as well. And I definitely want to make sure that we highlight more stories like this in the next 300 episodes. And so I guess, Tim, I asked the question is like, what do you think? What do the next 300 episodes have in store for us?
Well, this is the last episode. No, I'm just kidding. I think that there is so much opportunity here. And, one of the things we've talked about is bringing this community together, right? Of pharmacists empowering one another. This is not something that just Tim and I are leading or even our team at large. Like, we really feel this vision and work around financial wellness for the profession of pharmacy is ongoing. The work needs to be done. And that's only going to happen at the level it needs to happen with the impact that it has the potential to have if we can bring that community together to help one another, empower one another, share stories. So more stories are definitely on the horizon. Another thing, that I have as a vision for the future is more voices on the show. I love doing this.
Yeah.
But I recognize, that there's a ton of value in other perspectives, both internally and externally. So, we're going to have folks externally that are really passionate about certain topics, like we're working on this year with Corey Sanders, founder of Huna Health, leading our new Pharmacy Innovators series featuring pharmacy entrepreneurs, but also internally with the team, having more of the expertise of our certified financial planners, our tax professionals, other members of the YFP team to bring some other voices to the show. And then I think from a content standpoint, Tim, we've already started to make this transition that, we want to make sure we're representing the gamut of the pharmacy professional, right? From student pharmacist, new practitioner, mid-career, pre-retiree, retiree. We really feel like this topic of financial wellness in the profession of pharmacy is not, narrowed into any one of those groups, but really spans the entirety because those topics are changing naturally as our phase of life evolves. And so that will be done in content that we're bringing to specifically, more on that mid-career, pre-retiree, retiree, as well as stories in those phases of
Yeah.
life about that transition into retirement. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a pharmacist who's, mid-career, kids are starting to get to the point of getting out of the house, taking care of elderly parents, totally different, challenges and opportunities in different parts of the financial plan, and wanting to make sure we're bringing a voice to that as well. So that's the future I see. We've been doing this long enough to know that you can only plan so much, right? And there will be some pivot points that will naturally happen, and hopefully some opportunities that come as well. And then we don't have specifics on this yet, Tim, but both you and I share the vision of some more long form content, bringing some more video in. We'd love to deck out YFP HQ with the studio and do some more video as well. So stay tuned. We might crack that nut here in 2023. But what are your thoughts on that? Other ideas you have for the vision as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of followed at the time, when we launched the podcast, it was like, keep it to like a commute. So like 30 minutes. And we're seeing a lot of successful podcasts go where, you just kind of turn the mic on and you're just talking about a subject. And, a lot of the podcasts I listen to are, an hour plus. So I'm not necessarily, advocating for us to kind of drone on about HSAs or things like that. But I would like to be talking more about, when I was looking at some of the statistics, some of our most listened to episodes are less about money and more about the broader profession and things like, overall wellness. And I think that is really important for us to discuss. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to sit in our conference room here with you, Tim, and just kind of talk about broader issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that some of those discussions, if we actually recorded it and put those out to the masses, would be valuable, and kind of getting your perspective, obviously, my perspective and kind of how I've worked with pharmacists over the years and even an outsider. So I think if you're listening to this, we're definitely, open to feedback, whether that's more long form, broaden our scope a little bit. Are there people out there that are like, hey, I've been waiting for you to interview X, Y, or Z, like, nominate yourself. We'd love to get more voices on the podcast and really make the next 300 episodes better than the first 300. And like I said, I want to do more. We talked about more shifting and mid-career and retirees. I want to do more for my own, kind of education on like money and kids and how we should approach that, and what are some of the things that we should be teaching our kids so we don't kind of, imprint some of these money scripts on them. So there's lots of things that I think we still are, we need to dust off and really, work through. And there's probably a lot of guests that we need to have back on, and get updates. So all of that is on the table. But yeah, I'm just super bullish about the work that we've done on the podcast, but also the work that's yet to be done. And, excited about the conversation and excited about the journey and continuing to learn on my end. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of the show myself. Yeah, just excited for the next 300 in store.
I am too. It's going to be a fun journey. It has been a fun journey. And as we wrap up, I just want to again say thank you to the listeners. Tim, a thank you to you for the many hours you have put into the show, to the planning team, as we've had folks from there come onto the show, the many guests, just a few that we featured today. And again, a huge shout out to Caitlin and Rose from the YFP team that are really the engine behind us putting out this content each and every week and being able to make the show go on. So a big thank you to them. And as Tim mentioned, and I'll reiterate again, if you have an idea for the show, topic, guests, format of the show, we would love to hear that. You can email us info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. And last but certainly not least, if you've been a listener and you've liked the show, do us a favor, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and that will help others find the show as well. Tim, great stuff. Looking forward to the next 300.
Oh, yeah.
Before we wrap up today's episode of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, I want to again thank our sponsor, the American Pharmacists Association. APHA is every pharmacist ally advocating on your behalf for better working conditions, fair PBM practices, and more opportunities for pharmacists to provide care. Make sure to join a bolder APHA to gain premier access to financial educational resources and to receive discounts on YFP products and services. You can join APHA at a 25% discount by visiting pharmacist.com/join and using the coupon code YFP. Again, that's pharmacist.com/join using the coupon code YFP. As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of Your Financial Pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.